feminist and gay rights movements began in the early 1960s and continued through the mid-1970s. They both changed what American pop culture was and gave way to new groups being included in this new America. In order to understand just how monumental these movements were, one must understand what life was like for women and the gay community prior to the 1960s. Women, of course, were expected to stay in the home and raise the family. They could not have their own bank accounts or serve on a jury. Elitist schools like Harvard and Yale did not allow women to apply for entry. The idea of conformity was greatly encouraged during the 50s. Due to the baby boom following World War II, the idea that women should be wives and mothers was drilled into the heads of young women across the country. This conformity or die mentality is what led to the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s.
What Jimmy didn't know was that Ralph was sick, a sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual.
Even worse than being a woman, the gay community was totally shut out of American culture. As fears of communism ran through Congress in the early 50s, the Lavender Scare reared its ugly head. In this, the federal government rooted out thousands of employees who were suspected of being gay or lesbian, under the pretense that they were susceptible to Soviet blackmail. Ironically, this prosecution brought more attention to the plight of gay people in America and gave them the courage to fight back against societal norms. The feminist movement did what many movements struggle to do: bridge the gap between racial and socioeconomic lines. A large part of American women disliked the way that they were being treated in society regardless of their background. They were obviously fighting for equality between the sexes. They wanted to be treated the same way as men in the workplace, whereas in the past, they could be fired for reporting sexual harassment. They wanted to be freed from their assumed role of running the household and only being good for pleasing their husbands. On the same side of that coin, women wanted to be able to display and express their own sexuality without being ostracized from their community. Women wanted to be able to have sex with whoever they wanted to, whether they were married or not. This broad idea stemmed from the creation of the first contraceptive pill, championed by Margaret Sanger, which was approved by the federal government in 1960. The idea of contraceptives sparked an ongoing debate about whether contraceptives were bad for families and whether abortion constituted murder. Whilst all of this was going on, another movement had begun for another suppressed minority. The main goal of the gay rights movement was to achieve normalization of gay people in American society. They wanted average Americans to realize that gay people were really not that different from everyone else. Throughout the 60s, a sense of pride in being gay developed, and people were no longer ashamed of it. This movement grew throughout the 60s and exploded in 1969 with the Stonewall Riot. Police raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay nightclub in New York City, and arrested people. New Yorkers were suspicious that the police were targeting gay bars, which is what sparked the conflict with the police. Several days of protests occurred after the raid and led to the creation of the Gay Liberation Front, which was a much more radical group. The highest success of these groups was that of social equality. Although they did not instantly achieve full equality, women were more equal in the workplace and sexual harassment was taken much more seriously. Domestic abuse was also more serious of a crime, and men didn't have the right to discipline their wives anymore. If anything, the best thing about the gay rights movement was that they raised awareness for gay people. Those Americans living in small towns had never seen a gay person before, and thanks to the media, more people understood and identified with the gay rights activists. That is not to say that these groups did not achieve any legal changes. In 1973, homosexuality was removed from the federal list of mental disorders, which was a big step in the normalization of the gay community. Women also got the Supreme Court ruling in Roe v. Wade, basically saying that same year that said no one could restrict abortions in the first trimester of pregnancy. As one might imagine, this led to conflicts with conservatives and religious groups. The biggest roadblock for feminists and gay rights activists was the conservatives. These men and women believed that it was best for women to run the household rather than be out doing men's work. This often stemmed from a religious viewpoint where that which is written in the Bible supersedes all law. This also posed a problem for the gay community because conservatives believed that marriage was between one man and one woman, and anything else is unacceptable. The most famous conservative activist of the time was Phyllis Schlafly, who led the anti-feminist movement. These clashes with conservative America led to the ultimate ending of the movements. Women lobbied hard for an equal rights amendment to the Constitution, which would say that people could not be discriminated against on the basis of sex. The bill did indeed pass through the Senate and House of Representatives. However, it failed to get 35 states to ratify it, which is necessary to make it official. Largely due to Schlafly's lobbying, several states refused to ratify it by claiming that women already had these rights. This loss was a huge blow to the feminist movement, which ultimately fizzled out soon after having problems with their own. Lesbians were frustrated that only men were in charge of the Gay Liberation Front, so they formed their own faction in cooperation with the feminist groups. This proved to be their undoing because their actions were not focused on their common predicament. Therefore, they could not effectively lobby Congress or get laws passed. Similar to the civil rights movement before it, these movements took a turn to violence in the 1970s since they were not getting action from Congress. This shift from litigation to activism was far too fast in the eyes of moderate America, which led to the lack of legislative change. Despite perhaps not achieving all that they wished to, the feminist and gay rights movements definitely changed American culture. Women today can do pretty much anything a man can. Universities don't discriminate against women, and there are powerful women like Hillary Clinton who would not be where they are today had it not been for the feminist movement of the 1960s and 70s. The gay rights movement set the stage for future rulings like the United States versus Vinsdorf in 2013, which said that laws promoting same-sex civil unions are unconstitutional. Though there is still discrimination against these groups, the 1960s and 70s were important in shaping the world as we know it today.